ideas and inspiration that all culminate in designing the lifestyle that we've always dreamed of. No topics are off limits. We get into the practical, the hypothetical, and the downright juicy stuff. I'm Mindy Rosser, your host and lifestyle cheerleader, and I'm here today to talk about holding space for grumpy. You probably clicked on this and thought, what the heck is Mindy going to talk about this week? It's about being grumpy. How many of you have ever been grumpy? I'm like raising my hand. You can't see me. But I don't like to be grumpy. I like to be happy all the freaking time. So are you holding space for your grumpy, though? It's not always about putting on your happy face, but it's about being true to your emotions and feeling comfortable expressing them. And that's something I have always struggled with. I grew up in an environment where the only things you were supposed to express as a little person were being happy. I always had to smile. If you weren't smiling, something was wrong. So even if you had to suppress what you were really, truly feeling, the only emotions that were okay to express were happy ones, optimistic, not the sad ones. But as humans, we should really welcome the spectrum of emotions. This is something I've been discovering over the last year. It's been incredibly freeing. So it's not just about the ones we like or the ones that society says are okay. So the topic of this, it happened this last week when I was out surfing, and I will get to that. But we all know the story of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, yes? Okay, if you're a Disney person, you probably have watched the Snow White movie. There's one of the dwarves. His name is Grumpy. We never liked Grumpy. At least I never did. I always wanted to be the happy one, the smiling one, making everyone laugh. Let's, look on the bright side, always, all the time. So Grumpy initially, pushes back on Snow White's presence in the dwarfs' homes, but later he actually warns her of the threat by the queen, and he rushes to her aid, realizing that she is in danger. He's leading the charge, and he's frequently seen as the grumpy one and not the one that you want to be. And I felt like he was always kind of put down, but he actually came to save the day in the end. And I feel like this is such a good metaphor when it comes to expressing a range of emotions. We cannot eliminate grumpy without noticing a distinct imbalance in the way the seven dwarfs functioned. Happy needed a grumpy to balance him out. Happy is so oblivious to what's going on that if Grumpy Pants doesn't see that there's danger, there's going to be a big problem for Snow White and the dwarfs. So I think this applies to us as humans because we are really multifaceted creatures. I'm actually on a campaign coming out today to start encouraging more of us to hold space for our grumpy. So let me tell you about the experience I had this week. It was my grumpy experience. So when you go surfing, there's going to be a surfing metaphor. Yes, here we go. When you go surfing and you have a certain type of board. So I am actually on a fun board, if you're familiar with surfing. A fun board is kind of like what you ride when you are transitioning to a short board, or it's going to be a little bit on the waves are going to be a little bit smaller. You are trying to work your way to a short board. You don't really want to take out a long board. That's what I ride. So I have a fun board. It's a 6'4" modern love child. If you want to Google it, look it up. You can look it up. I love that board. I've ridden it hundreds of times. And when I take it out, I know there are a certain type of waves that I can catch. I know what's too mushy to catch waves on. I know where to sit and position myself to catch waves on that board. I know what I can and cannot take. I know what conditions I need to ride that board. So today was a typical day. We're heading to Poena Point. So that is another spot that you can Google and look up if you're curious. I also have shared a lot on Instagram from Poena Point. So Poena Point is a beginner spot. If you are just learning to surf and you don't want locals to get too angry at you for doing something kooky, then you want to surf Poena Point. And it is a fantastic place to surf. When the crowds are not there, when the surf instructors are not there, when there are not too many kooks in the water, and when it is not completely flat. So it's a point break. And when the waves come in, unless it's a really good size swell and the angle is just right, it's a hit or miss. It's one of those hit or miss spots. Like it can be either really, really flat or it can be really good and consistent. So today, my husband, Jason, he has a longboard. So he has this gorgeous, I think it's an 8.6. I'm being correct in my specs. I think it's an 8.6. So he has a longboard. So longboards, if you're not familiar, they can catch really tiny waves. You can also sit further back in the lineup, so you can sit closer to the peak. You can catch them a little bit earlier than somebody like me on a fun board. So he has his 8.6. He's ready. He's looking out at the water. I'm looking at it thinking, we walked up with our boards. I'm looking at Puerto. I'm like, it's looking pretty flat. There is not much energy in the water. And he's like, no. I've been watching it. It's good. There's sets coming in. It's going to be fantastic. Just wait. You're just seeing it in between sets. I'm thinking, I don't know. It's looking pretty flat. You can catch those things, but I can't. I've got my fun board. You've got a big old longboard. So I was already feeling a little bit antsy, to say the least. When it looks like that, when I look at the water and I see that I'm going to be sitting there for an hour meditating, I don't get very excited about surfing, because when I surf, I'm okay with if it's a little bit lully as in it takes a little while for sets to come in. But if you're sitting there for 20 minutes, freezing because you're sitting in water and not moving, that is not very fun. And so I'm looking at the water thinking, it's not going to be very fun for me unless we get lucky. And he's like, don't worry, it's going to pick up. So we paddle out. And he goes straight for the peak. That's where he likes to sit. I have to sit a little bit further inside. I have a smaller board. Can't catch him where he can catch him. We're sitting there. We're waiting. Set comes through. It's a decent set. I'm like, okay, great. But there's only like 3 waves in the set. All the people on the longboards can catch them before I catch them. Sit there some more. So we're sitting there. He catches a wave. I'm like, oh, that's an epic wave. He caught it at the peak. It was gorgeous. He was riding it down the line. And because of where we sit, I get to see him because I take them at what you would call a little later in the progression with the wave. So he catches them early. So when he's coming down the line, I can see him and I, hoot and holler, give him a shaka. I'm like, that's awesome. That was a sick wave. The drop was perfect. And so I was happy for him. Still waiting for my waves. So he paddles back out. He's all stoked. Goes back to his spot. Another wave comes. I'm like, great, he's going to let me take it, because I've been sitting here for a while. No, he paddles, takes the wave. Another perfect drop, sick drop. Comes down the line. By this point, I'm upset. It's been like 30 minutes, and I've gotten leftovers from all the guys on the longboard, and it is flat. And then all of a sudden, for another 20 minutes, it just goes completely flat. Like, we are sitting there, we're staring. He comes over to me, he's like, hey, how's it going? I'm like, not very good. I said, you just going to be a wave hog and take all the waves? She's like, well, I was in the perfect position to catch him. And I'm like, that wasn't cool. Yeah, you got to share waves, bro. You got to share waves. So as a surfer, if somebody's on a longboard and there's somebody on a shortboard, you're cognizant of everybody in the lineup. You have to make sure that you don't take all the waves just because you can. And you never take 2 waves in a row, especially when it's slow. So I was pissed off. I was angry. I was like, on the inside. And so usually what I would do is I would suppress it. And I would just not express my frustration. And I would try to channel it and just like catch some waves. But I had to sit there. I had to sit there and stew in my emotions. And I could have chosen to just reframe it and be okay. Or I could have chosen to be grumpy. And this time, instead of doing what I typically do and putting on my little happy face, saying, oh, it's great, I get to meditate for 20 minutes, I put on my grumpy face. Jason comes, paddles up next to me. A few minutes later, how's it going? It's like, and you can't see me right now. I stuck my hand out, and you know how people are hitchhiking and you put your thumb up? Well, I did that same motion and put my thumb down and like, with an exclamation point, like, and he just burst out laughing. Both of us just burst out laughing. And I said, I'm pulling a Dougie. And so basically Dougie is our son. And when he's upset, he will just stick his thumb down and stick it right out and just shake his head. Not good. Not good. And, there's something to be said in expressing that emotion. There's something to be said for that. It's when Dougie does that, when I did that, it wasn't a bad thing. It was literally just expressing frustration in the moment. At that point, we just cracked up, and it got to be really, really funny. So the session was terrible, to make a long story short. The session was like, I caught a couple of waves, but not my normal counts, not the intensity that I like. I don't like sitting, and I don't like catching leftovers. And so we paddled in, and we felt the tension. And usually what I would try to do is like, Yeah, it was great. How was your waves? You caught some sick waves. And I did say that. I did say he did catch some 3 really, really good waves. But instead, this time I said, I didn't have a good session and I feel grumpy and I'm upset. We should have gone to Alihi. So that's another spot that is a little more aggressive and it's a right. So I like rights. Jason likes lefts at Puena. I like rights at Alihi. So there's always this battle. Like, who's going to get the spot, right? It's unspoken sometimes, but one of us always wins. So I was upset. I'm like, we should have gone to Alihi. And he goes, yeah, sometimes you just have a grumpy session. And he said, you know what? Being grumpy is okay. There was a moment just in that conversation, in that dialogue where I thought, it's okay to be grumpy. I'm allowed to be grumpy. If I don't have to have a perfect surf session. I don't have to always reframe it immediately. I'm allowed to feel that grumpiness. And so to process that, I said, hey, is it okay? On the way home, let's go stop by Alihi. I just wanted to look at it. So we stopped by Alihi. I expressed some more grumpiness on the way. I pretty much berated him for not reading the signs, not paddling in sooner. We should have left and gone to Alihi, 15 minutes into the session. He listened, and he just held space for me. And it was a moment I just thought, wow, I'm like laying it on him. And he's just holding that space. He's not getting upset. He's just there and he's listening and he's like, yeah, I'm sorry. He's like, I had some grumpy sessions too. I'm like, I know you did. You had some really grumpy sessions. Well, I just had a terrible session. And by the time we got to Alihi, I got out, looked at the water. He said, if you want to paddle out, he's like, it's okay. You can go paddle out and I'll sit here. I'll watch. He's like, I'm good with surfing for the day. But if that will make you feel better, let's do it. And just that comment softened the edges. But it also allowed me to kind of finish up my grumpiness and get through it instead of bottling it up. And in the past, I always bottled it up and I would carry it around for days, weeks, and sometimes not even realize that it was problematic. And I would just carry it around and it would bottle up and express itself in other ways. And this time it was different. This time I had a chance to get my grumpiness out. And by the time we got home, I said, you know what? I'm good. I didn't feel the need to surf Alihi. He made one comment too. We were rinsing off our feet. You got to wash off the sand before you come in the house. And he said, Mindy, you're a better surfer than I am. And he just kind of like said it under his breath. And I'm like, okay, I'm good now. It was just that moment. Like he acknowledged the grumpiness. He said, your skills are fine. You're a great surfer. Everybody just has bad days. And he was an example to me of how to embrace the emotions that I don't like, those uncomfortable emotions, and process them. We got in the house and I was excited. I was like, okay, I'm good. I'm going to go back to work. And that emotion has been done and processed. So within the span of an hour and a half, something that would last for weeks for me sometimes, and I wouldn't even know why I was so upset on the inside, was processed in 90 minutes. So where can you be holding space for your grumpy? It's okay to be grumpy. It's okay. Not every session has to be awesome in the water. Just like every workday doesn't have to be awesome. You don't have to reframe everything in the minutes. You don't have to be perfect. And I feel that pressure sometimes from society where it's like you have to be perfect all the time. If you're not being perfect, then you're doing something wrong. You're not being like this eternal optimist. So when we experience this range of emotions and we do learn how to process them effectively, and it's different for each of us, you have to figure out what works. You have to try things. Then we no longer need to feel that suppression and we don't have those negative emotions bottling up. We can actually get through things better and faster, and then we can reframe, and then we can move on with the rest of our day. I went surfing later that night and had a fantastic session. It was super fun, and I didn't let that grumpiness hang over me, but I processed it. I let it take the time it needed to take to get through it. And I had a space and a person who was willing to listen to me and be there for me without judgment. That is special. A good friend or a partner or somebody that can hold space for you like that, that's a gift. And I think when you notice that, when you recognize that, and you can appreciate that person for holding space for you, sometimes you have to hold space for yourself. Sometimes you don't have a person there. It's really powerful, and it's something that you should notice in the moment, be grateful for, and enjoy your grumpiness. Enjoy it. It felt so good to just be grumpy and use my emotions and just say what I wanted to say. And I think it's just a healthy thing for us. Another time, that I want to talk about with anger. Anger and grumpiness, I feel like kind of go together. And expressing anger can be difficult for some of us too, hand in hand with the grumpy. But when we have conflict, I am definitely a conflict avoidant person. So it's very difficult for me to address things head on. I tend to, again, like the grumpiness, let them stew inside. And so I think when it comes to anger, it's also something that we need to think about and process. There was a situation that I had with Jason, and it was related to something super, super simple. Basically, during the day, we live in Hawaii, and so we are in a very tight quarters. So that means I don't have the luxury of having an office in a separate space with soundproofing that I can lock the door and go upstairs. Like, we are in a very small place, and compared to others who live by us, we are in a huge house. But for most people that I know from the mainland and compared to our house there, it's very small. So you don't have a lot of space to go and roam and kind of block doors, and you have to create space in the house when you are trying to get work done. So I was trying to get work done, and on a daily basis, I'd be in like this deep headspace, working away. I'm like feeling super creative, and Jason would just come in and just start talking and processing things and, emotional stuff sometimes. I'm like, damn it, man, I've got to work. So this built up, built up, built up, built up. And because I didn't process it, I didn't have a way to deal with it, it turned into something huge. Not huge block in our relationship. And you know what? I went to therapy. Therapy is fantastic, by the way. Went to therapy, talked with my therapist about this. And she goes, you just need to set boundaries. Like, she's like, it's really that simple. Like, just have boundaries. Just say, okay, when I'm working, I'm shutting the door. And when you figure out how to communicate that and you can express your anger in a way that's not, hurting, it's not vengeful, it's not, trying to hurt somebody's feelings, but just a way where you are accurately describing how you feel and then figuring out a solution to work through it for the two of you. She's like, just give it a try, see what happens. I did. I gave it a try. One morning I come out and I'm like, okay, I've got to express this. I've got to say what I'm going to say. And you know what? We actually started laughing about it. We're like, oh, that's actually quite a simple thing to solve. I'll just shut the door during the day when I'm working. I'll lock it. That means don't come in. Just like my door is locked right now. Nobody's coming in while I'm making the podcast. It was really that simple. But I think having the space to express that anger, and I think for him holding that space and not taking it personally and realizing, hey, this is just something that we need to work through. We like spending time together, but how can we do it in a way that's not, conflicting with work, that is keeping everybody happy, and where we all still feel connected, but not trampling over each other, especially in tight quarters. So it's just another example of how can we work through things but still express our emotions. And I think the fear for me was that if I expressed that emotion, I would be rejected, that I would hurt somebody on the other side, that I was not being a good human by expressing anything that was anything but optimistic and positive. And that's really not the case. The people who love us, they want to see the spectrum of emotions. Like, I feel really special when Jason or my kids or my family members, my mom, come to me and share things with me that they may not have fully emotionally processed, but I am part of their process and I can hold space for them. I think this can also apply to work, to our clients, to working with other colleagues. How are we holding space for people? Not everybody's going to show up to work every single day and that happy face. Yes, I'm like ready to take on the day, ready to change the world. Some days are just going to be a little bit more on the melancholy side. And when we can hold space for the grumpy and not take it personal, when it's somebody else around us or when it is ourselves, and we can just be there, be present, work through those emotions, a beautiful result can come on the other side of that. And we can actually be healthier humans, which I think is super, super darn cool. So why not try a different approach? As driven people, I feel like we live in this culture that's hyper-focused on that optimism. Like, you want to be the happy person all the time. And everyone seems to be like trying to turn that frown upside down or stop feeling a negative emotion as quickly as possible. Instead, why don't we try slowing down the process sometimes before we start immediately reframing? Why don't we just embrace a little bit of grumpy? Like, sometimes I use my journal and I'll just, blah, The journal, that can work really well. Or sometimes, like if I'm feeling grumpy, I'll go work out. Sometimes I'll go surf. Sometimes I will talk to a friend. Sometimes I'll write my mom. It just depends on the moment. And I think learning how to express these things without hurting people, learning how to express and work through our emotions is just as important as reframing and turning that frown upside down. So try embracing that little grumpy. I would love to hear how it goes. You may start experiencing a freedom you didn't think was possible. Like, have you heard of those? I think they're like these vans or buses that drive around and you can actually just like go inside and scream really loud. And like how freeing that is for people. I think there's something very cathartic about letting out your grumpy, letting out that anger in a way that is positive still. Like it is still positive. It's the kind of the funny thing about it. It's not that you are hurting somebody or just being grumpy for the sake of being grumpy. It is processing your emotions. And I'm not trying to give advice if you are depressed, if you have a mental health condition, please seek guidance. This is not prescriptive. I'm not trying to tell you, oh, you'll be fine, just be grumpy as long as possible. I'm talking about those moments that are a little more lighthearted, where it's like it's a very light thing that you can process. Seriously, get help if you need it. I do highly recommend that you seek mental health treatment if you are struggling and having depressive thoughts, which are different than just moments of grumpiness. So where can you hold space for your grumpy this week? Like, if a grumpy moment happens, I want you to pause. I want you to think about it and say, I am going to embrace my grumpy for a little bit here and just be free with it. Hold that space and allow yourself to work through those emotions. And you can still be optimistic. It's fine. Just work through the emotions. See how you feel on the other side. And I am curious to hear how it goes for you. So no matter where you fall on the spectrum of complete optimist, complete pessimist, or grumpiness, or happiness, DM me on Instagram to share your take on those scenarios, because I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this topic too. Let's encourage and inspire each other. If you like what you hear, please subscribe to the Mango Effect podcast, wherever you listen to podcasts, so you don't miss an episode. I am really excited about our next episode as well. I'd be thrilled if you could write a 5-star review for the show if you love it. We're a new show, so any reviews and subscribes we get will definitely help us as we grow. All right, I will talk to you soon. Have a beautiful rest of your day. Mahalo.